He didn't know why he rode into that town. Told himself it was for a horse, but he left with a person, with a piece of his own blood. Only he didn't know it. Not yet. The town was dry, scorched, as if it had been waiting to die. In the middle of the square, people stood, silent, indifferent, and on a wooden platform, a girl, a face without age, eyes without light. They were selling her like something useless, like something to be rid of. He raised his hand, just like that, without a reason, or maybe with one he didn't understand. And in that moment, everything he thought was buried began to stir again. The heat pressed down like a weight. The wind didn't move. His boots stepped slow through the dust toward the crowd. The platform creaked. A number was shouted, then another. Then silence. They pushed the girl forward, rope on her wrists, barefoot, hollow. She followed the man with the quiet eyes. She didn't look back. He didn't ask her name. Didn't need to. Not yet. Behind them, the town sagged in the heat. And the past, whatever was left of it, began to follow too. They rode out just as the sun dipped behind distant mesas, leaving the town's heat to fade into memory. Dust rose from their horses' hooves, swallowed by the pale light of dusk. The girl followed without a word, her steps unsteady in the stirrups, wrists still marked where the rope had burned. He guided his mount onto a narrow trail between scrub oak and mesquite, the air trembling with evening insects, the world narrowing to the rhythm of their passage. By the time darkness pooled beneath the canyon's shoulders, he slowed the horse and chose a hollow where the wind bent low around a cluster of boulders. The ground was firm, broken only by hardy grass pale in the lantern's glow. He tethered the horses to a nearby juniper, their breath leaving soft clouds in the cooling air. The girl dismounted, one hand trailing along her thigh, as though feeling for something she'd never known. He gathered dead branches from the lee of a rock, twigs crisp as parchment, lichened logs hollowed by time, arranged them in a small arc. Sparks leapt from flint and steel, and a flame took hold with a hiss, sending a thin curl of smoke toward the stars. The fire's glow spread, revealing the girl's profile, hollowed cheeks, eyelashes damp with dust, shoulders pulled inward against the chill. She sat, legs folded beneath her, eyes fixed on the dancing embers, as if mapping their movement to a memory he could not yet name. He unpacked a tin pot, filled it with water from a canteen warmed earlier against his coat. As it began to steam, he sliced dried venison with practiced care, thin strips, each one cut on the old knife's edge until the meat curled and darkened. He dropped the pieces into the pot, stirring until they swelled and softened. The aroma was faintly sweet, carried on the night air to where coyotes lurked beyond the ridge. He handed her a bowl of broth, steam rising to blur the edges of her face. She took it without looking up, tilting the tin to her lips, only enough for warmth, not to sate hunger. The liquid trembled in the bowl, reflecting moonlight in liquid silver. She sipped once, twice, and then set the bowl aside, untouched beyond that. He did not ask her to eat more. He simply scooped out a piece of jerky for himself, chewing slowly, aware of the way the firelight flickered across her ribs. Silence stretched between them, threaded with the crack of burning wood and the low moan of wind through juniper needles. Somewhere down the trail an owl called, its cry distant, unhurried. He watched the girl's shoulders rise and fall, watched the way the firelight left half her face in shadow, as though she carried some darkness beyond sight. When the broth cooled to nothing, he tilted the bowl toward the coals until it lay empty. He rose, shaking embers from his hands, then unwrapped a heavy blanket and draped it over her shoulders. She did not look up. Instead, she settled further into herself, as if finding whatever comfort could be found in the night's sharp hush. He put out the fire, stones first, then earth, until only the faint glow of embers remained. The horses shifted, restless in the dark. The girl closed her eyes. He kept watch, leaning against a rock, rifle across his knees, listening to the small sounds. The low scrape of hoof on dirt, the rustle of brush, the echo of an owl's cry rolling back from the canyon walls. No words passed between them. In the deep quiet, they were two figures bound by dust and distance, moving forward through a night that already held the echoes of a fate neither fully understood. They rode out just as the sun dipped behind distant mesas, leaving the town's heat to fade into memory. Dust rose from their horses' hooves, swallowed by the pale light of dusk. The girl followed without a word, her steps unsteady in the stirrups, wrists still marked where the rope had burned. He guided his mount onto a narrow trail between scrub oak and mesquite, the air trembling with evening insects, the world narrowing to the rhythm of their passage. By the time darkness pooled beneath the canyon's shoulders, he slowed the horse and chose a hollow where the wind bent low around a cluster of boulders. The ground was firm, broken only by hardy grass pale in the lantern's glow. He tethered the horses to a nearby juniper, their breath leaving soft clouds in the cooling air. The girl dismounted, one hand trailing along her thigh, as though feeling for something she'd never known. He gathered dead branches from the lee of a rock, twigs crisp as parchment, lichened logs hollowed by time, arranged them in a small arc. Sparks leapt from flint and steel, and a flame took hold with a hiss, sending a thin curl of smoke toward the stars. The fire's glow spread, revealing the girl's profile. Hollowed cheeks, eyelashes damp with dust, shoulders pulled inward against the chill. She sat, legs folded beneath her, eyes fixed on the dancing embers, as if mapping their movement to a memory he could not yet name. He unpacked a tin pot, filled it with water from a canteen warmed earlier against his coat. As it began to steam, he sliced dried venison with practiced care. Thin strips, each one cut on the old knife's edge until the meat curled and darkened. He dropped the pieces into the pot, stirring until they swelled and softened. The aroma was faintly sweet, carried on the night air to where coyotes lurked beyond the ridge. He handed her a bowl of broth, steam rising to blur the edges of her face. She took it without looking up, tilting the tin to her lips. Only enough for warmth, not to sate hunger. The liquid trembled in the bowl, reflecting moonlight in liquid silver. She sipped once, twice, and then set the bowl aside, untouched beyond that. He did not ask her to eat more. He simply scooped out a piece of jerky for himself, chewing slowly, aware of the way the firelight flickered across her ribs. Silence stretched between them, threaded with the crack of burning wood and the low moan of wind through juniper needles. Somewhere down the trail an owl called, its cry distant, unhurried. He watched the girl's shoulders rise and fall, watched the way the firelight left half her face in shadow, as though she carried some darkness beyond sight. When the broth cooled to nothing, he tilted the bowl toward the coals until it lay empty. He rose, shaking embers from his hands, then unwrapped a heavy blanket and draped it over her shoulders. She did not look up. Instead, she settled further into herself, as if finding whatever comfort could be found in the night's sharp hush. He put out the fire, stones first, then earth, until only the faint glow of embers remained. The horses shifted, restless in the dark. The girl closed her eyes. He kept watch, leaning against a rock, rifle across his knees, listening to the small sounds. The low scrape of hoof on dirt, the rustle of brush, the echo of an owl's cry rolling back from the canyon walls. No words passed between them. In the deep quiet, they were two figures bound by dust and distance, moving forward through a night that already held the echoes of a fate neither fully understood. By morning, the ground had changed. Somewhere in the dark hours, the wind had shifted. Cold had come with it, thin, brittle, like a warning, and the earth had taken on a paler tone. Frost edged the branches. Hoof prints left behind by the horses had hardened to chalk-gray scars. Breath hung in the air now, slower and visible, like something alive. The girl woke first. She didn't stretch or speak, just opened her eyes and stared at the sky, pale blue and raw above the ridgeline. Her blanket had slipped halfway off during the night. She didn't pull it back. The cold didn't seem to reach her. He stood near the fire pit, already rebuilt, coaxing flame from coals he'd banked with care. His hands moved steadily. No haste, no sound but the soft rasp of metal and the low crack of firewood catching. When she rose, she stood barefoot for a moment, staring down at her own feet, as if they weren't hers. Then she stepped carefully across the cold earth and sat near the fire, knees drawn in, fingers wrapped around them like wire. The man passed her a flat piece of bread, still warm from the pan, and another cup of broth. She took them the same way as the night before, quietly without thanks. This time she ate more. Not much, but enough. He watched the tree line as she chewed. Something in the silence was heavier than it had been. The trail ahead curved north, where the land grew thinner, colder, sharper. But it wasn't the weather that made his jaw tighten. It was something behind them, or perhaps something inside. They packed before the sun cleared the hills, saddles cinched, rifles checked. Her rope was gone now, cut and dropped into the fire before dawn. She walked beside the horse until he nodded for her to mount. They moved out through frost-bitten grass, hoof prints breaking a white crust as they climbed a narrow pass. The world around them grew quiet. No birds, no insects, just wind in dead branches and the long exhale of cold sky. At the summit, they paused. Below, the valley spread in shadow and light, drifts of snow in hollows, long black lines where trees had frozen stiff. He scanned the horizon. She followed his gaze. Neither spoke. And then they saw it. Footprints, not theirs. A second trail, fresh and uncertain, wandered across the lower ridge. Smaller feet, closer together, sometimes stumbling, as if someone else had come through in the night, lost or hunted. He studied them a long time, then turned away without comment. But the girl, she looked back once more. Something in the shape of those steps, just barely deeper than hers, seemed to reach through her like a whisper. She didn't say a word, just kept riding. The snow deepened as they rode north. Not thick enough to bury a horse's leg, but enough to swallow the ground's voice. Each hoofstep landed soft, muffled, as though the land itself was holding its breath. Even the trees stood still, bare, wind-burned trunks, their limbs raised like ribs beneath a winter sky. Around midday, clouds moved in low and heavy. Pale light dimmed further, and the horizon blurred. He adjusted the brim of his hat and nudged the horse into a slower rhythm. The girl rode behind him now, her blanket pulled up to her chin, face half lost beneath its folds. Her eyes didn't move. Only her breath, rising slow and steady, visible in the cold. By late afternoon, they saw it. A structure, distant, quiet, and wrong. It stood between two cottonwoods near the edge of a frozen stream. No smoke, no horse tethered. Just the shape of a house, small, slanted, almost too still. He hadn't seen it marked on any map, and he would have remembered. The roof sagged in the middle. One shutter hung loose, banging soft in the wind, then still again. There were no footprints around it, not fresh ones. He dismounted without a word, motioned for her to stay. She didn't argue, just watched him walk the distance through the snow, each step slow and deliberate, like someone stepping into memory. The door was ajar. It creaked when he pushed it open, though not from rust, more from age, from having been left alone too long. Inside, the air was heavy with cold. There was furniture, what was left of it, a table near the wall, a chair tipped on its side. In the far corner, a child's doll, rotting, half melted by time and mice. One curtain stirred faintly from a crack in the wall. Dust lay everywhere, thick and untouched. He stepped forward, and the floor groaned. Against the back wall, a coat still hung from a nail. A man's, worn thin at the cuffs. Beneath it, a rusted rifle leaned, its barrel bent, as if someone had once meant to come back, but never did. There were scratches on the inside of the door, tallied lines, maybe days, maybe people. He didn't count them. Behind him, the girl appeared in the doorway. She hadn't waited. She stood there a long time, staring past him, past the room, into something else. Then she turned and walked back into the snow without a sound. He stayed 1 minute longer, long enough to feel the weight in the air. Then followed. They didn't speak, not with words, not with looks, but something had shifted, not in the trail, not in the weather, in her, and maybe in him too. Though he wouldn't admit it, not yet. By the time they reached the river, night had begun its quiet descent, a dimming of the edges, a cooling of breath. The snow along the bank was smoother there, undisturbed except for the winding lines of rabbit tracks and the black bones of half-frozen reeds leaning toward the current. The water moved beneath a thin crust of ice, whispering to itself as it passed under driftwood and stone. He led the horses down carefully, boots sinking just past the ankle. Frost crunched under each step like cracking glass. The girl stayed close, her gaze fixed not on the trail, but on the shapes between the trees, the long shadows where trunks split the last of the winter light. Her silence was tighter now, not the numb kind, the listening kind. They crossed at a narrow place where the ice held strong. He tested it with his weight first, stepping slow, knees bent slightly, rifle in hand. Then came the horses, their hooves slipping once, but not breaking through. The girl went last, arms stiff at her sides, eyes darting once toward the water beneath the ice, then away. On the far side, the ground rose sharply. He found a game trail hidden beneath the drifts, old but walkable, and followed it up into a grove of pines. The wind died there. Sound dropped out. Snow rested thick on the needles, unmoving, and in that hush they found what had been left behind. The chimney stood first, blackened, alone, like a monument to something ruined. Around it, charred beams jutted from the snow, half swallowed by time. A wall still stood on the north side, scorched, warped inward by flame. Beyond it, nothing, just silence and the shape of what used to be a home. He stopped at the edge, took off his hat. The girl didn't stop. She walked straight into it, the ruin, and stood in the place where the hearth might have been. She looked down, bent slowly, brushed snow away with her sleeve until the ash beneath began to show. A little darker, a little warmer. She found something small there, held it in her hand. No larger than a coin. He couldn't see what it was, but her hand trembled. She didn't cry, didn't speak. She just sat, knees drawn in, thumb pressed to that thing in her palm. And behind her, the wind returned, faint, curling through the trees like breath held too long. He built no fire that night. They stayed in the ruin, beneath what was left of the roof beam, wrapped in their coats, the horses tied close. The cold crept in slow, but neither of them moved to chase it out. Because sometimes the cold is the only thing that tells you you're still here, still breathing, still unfinished. And in the dark, beneath the snow, something waited. A name, a memory, a reckoning still to come. They woke to silence, the kind that follows snowfall, heavy, clean, absolute. The ruin had changed overnight. Drift had pushed in through the ribs of the blackened walls, softening the edges of what fire had broken. The chimney leaned now, just barely, casting a long, crooked shadow across the ash. Ice clung to the beams like white moss. He stood before dawn, brushed the snow from his shoulders, and moved to the edge of the clearing. The pine trees beyond stood still, their upper branches holding the weight of white like bowed heads. He scanned the woods without urgency. Just a habit, just the way a man looks when he knows the past isn't done with him. She rose slower, her blanket stiff with frost. Her breath fogged the air in short bursts. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't ask anything. Just stood there for a while, staring at the hollow where she'd knelt the night before. They didn't eat. There was no firewood dry enough to burn, no bird song to break the stillness. Only crows in the trees above, 3 of them, watching with the patience of things that wait for what's next. By midday, the wind returned. It came sharp, not loud, a blade, not a roar, cutting through wool and bone alike. He led them out through a pass behind the ruin, a route few traveled, half lost beneath snowfall and dead branches. The girl followed without question, one hand resting lightly on the saddle's edge. Her eyes scanned the trail behind them more than ahead. They stopped once, where a fence used to be. Nothing remained but 6 rotted posts in a broken strand of wire, looped like a snare around a tree's base. He looked at it a long time, not because of what it was, but what it used to mean. In the snow nearby, half covered by wind and time, was a boot print. Small, shallow, older than last night. He crouched beside it, touched the edge with 2 fingers, then stood and moved on. Didn't speak, but the pace changed. A little faster now, a little less uncertain. That night, they made camp beneath a stone bluff, shaped like a leaning head. He tied the horses near the rock wall, built a small fire, and warmed the tin pot between his knees. The girl sat close, not from fear, just from the cold. She held the object she'd found in the ashes again, still turning it in her hand. In the firelight, he finally saw what it was. A button, small, bone, charred around the edge, the kind sewn to a child's coat. Neither of them said anything, but she didn't put it away, and he didn't look away. Above them, the crows had followed, still watching, still waiting. They reached the old line shack by dusk. It sat low in the valley, hidden beneath the shoulder of a ridge where the wind curved hard and the snow drifted in quiet spirals. A bare structure, single room, slanted roof, a stovepipe that hadn't breathed in years. The boards were split and gray, weathered to the color of forgotten things. But it stood, and that was enough. He pushed the door open with the flat of his hand. It stuck once, then gave with a soft groan. The air inside was dry, dust sweet, thick with the smell of cedar smoke, long since gone. A nest of mice had torn a blanket to pieces in the corner. The stove was rusted shut, but the place held heat better than the ruin, and the walls didn't lean. He brought the girl in first. She moved slow, stepping over the threshold like someone entering memory. Her fingers grazed the doorframe. Something in her posture shifted. A pause that wasn't cold or fear, but something older. He noticed, but didn't press. Just unsaddled the horses, tied them behind the shack where the bluff gave shelter from the wind, then gathered what dry twigs he could find along the creek bed. A fire took, small and stubborn. The warmth spread slow, barely enough for fingers, but they said nothing. The girl curled beneath the spare coat he laid out. Her eyes stayed open, watching the ceiling as it creaked faintly under the weight of settling frost. He sat near the door, and that's when he saw it. On the inside of the wall, just above where a shelf used to hang, someone had carved a name. C. Dayton. The letters were faint, worn, as if someone had run their hand over them too many times. But they were still there, still deep enough to catch the light. He stared at the name a long time. His face didn't move. His breathing didn't change. But something inside him did. Because that name hadn't been spoken in years. Not since a fire, not since a trial, not since a man he once trusted ruined everything and left behind a grave with no marker. He didn't look at the girl, didn't ask if she saw it too. But when he finally sat down again, her eyes were already on him. Just faintly, just from beneath the edge of the coat. And in her hand, she still held the button. Not tight, not hidden, just there, like something waiting to be understood. The storm came without warning. Just after dawn, when the sky was still pewter and the wind carried only the hush of pine needles shifting in sleep, snow began to fall again. Thicker now, heavier, like it meant to stay. It came sideways at first, then straight down, thickening the air until the valley disappeared in folds of white. He stepped outside early, alone, to check the horses. The flakes clung to his beard, melted along his collar. One of the animals had started to limp, a front leg, strained from the rocky climb the day before. He wrapped it tight with an old strip of linen, then stood in the stillness, listening. No birds, no movement, just snow landing soft on snow. Back in the shack, she was kneeling near the stove, feeding the last of the dry twigs into the coals. She moved quietly like a girl who'd once been told not to take up space. When she reached up to tuck her hair behind her ear, he saw it. Not clearly, just the shape of it, a pale scar beneath the hairline, small but deep, the kind left by glass or buckle or hand. She turned then, and the coat collar rose again. But he'd seen enough. They spent the morning without words. She cleaned the floor with an old burlap sack, sweeping dust into her palm and tossing it outside into the snow. He sharpened his knife by the fire, edge steady, never fast. Something about the way they moved, careful, parallel, made the silence between them feel full, not empty. Later, he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out an old map, laid it flat on the ground. The ink was faded, the edges curled. He smoothed it with one hand, traced a line from the valley to a name that had long since stopped meaning anything. Dayton's Crossing. She looked over his shoulder. He didn't explain, but she stayed there beside him, kneeling in the same posture as before, her breath slow, steady, like maybe she knew that name too. Not from memory, but from stories told in the wrong tone. with the wrong silences afterward. By nightfall, the wind had picked up. It screamed through the cracks in the wall like a voice trying to get in. He stuffed burlap into the holes, laid the saddle blankets against the door, and fed the fire whatever scraps they had left. And then, without asking, she crawled closer to the hearth and unwrapped the cloth she'd been carrying since the auction. Inside, a book, torn, half frozen, the cover gone, just pages now, smudged with soot and time. She opened to the center and ran her finger down the page, then stopped. He looked once. The line read, "All children are marked, but not all marks are seen." She didn't say anything, but when she closed the book, her fingers brushed the scar again. Not absent-mindedly, not hiding it, just acknowledging. And outside, the snow kept falling, bearing tracks, swallowing names, and erasing the line between what had been chosen and what had simply come. The snow stopped in the night, not softly, not slowly, just ended. Like a breath held too long, released all at once. By morning, the world had changed again. The valley lay buried under a new silence, one thick enough to press against the ribs. He rose before light and stood outside the shack, boots half sunk, eyes tracing the sky for signs. The clouds had broken open, revealing a pale blue above the treetops, cold and sharp. Smoke from the last of their fire curled into it, thin and reluctant. Somewhere in the distance, something moved. Not animal, not wind, something heavier. By the time she stepped outside, wrapped in the coat 2 sizes too large, he was already saddling the horse. The limp was worse. It made the pace uncertain, but he adjusted. Redistributed weight, checked straps, paused longer between steps. They left the valley without a word. By noon, the trees thinned. The path ahead sloped downward into flat country, wide, empty, sun-bleached. A trestle bridge cut across a half-frozen stream, and standing there just before the crossing was a man, not young, not old, wrapped in a thick wool coat, collar turned high. But it wasn't his face or posture that caught the eye. It was his gloves, bright red leather, the color of blood dried too fast, the kind a man doesn't wear for warmth, but for memory. The trapper slowed. His hand went instinctively to the rifle strapped at his back, but didn't draw. He studied the man's stance. Easy, but not careless. The way he stood, not blocking the bridge, not offering it either. The girl shifted behind him. He felt it, a tightening in the air between them. The man in the red gloves didn't move. Not even his breath showed in the cold. And then, finally, just before the horse took the first step onto the bridge, the man spoke. Not aloud, not in sound, just a motion. One hand, gloved, lifting slowly to point back the way they'd come. Not a threat, not a command, just a suggestion, a warning. The trapper stared a long moment, then rode forward anyway. They passed within 6 feet of the stranger, close enough to smell the pipe smoke in his coat, close enough to see that the red gloves were old, worn at the knuckles, cracked along the seams, close enough to know this man had stood in a courtroom once, or outside a burning barn. But the girl didn't look at him, and he didn't look at her. After they crossed the bridge, she turned once in the saddle, just slightly. The man was gone. Only snow on wood now, only silence behind them. And in that silence, a new thread had been added. Taut, invisible, running backward into the dark. The kind that pulls when you're not watching. The kind you feel just behind the ribs. The land stretched bare in every direction. A cold plain of dead grass and low hills, stiff with frost. Wind moved in long, steady lines across it, like something herding ghosts. The sky had thinned to a brittle blue, but the sun offered no warmth. They didn't speak. They hadn't spoken in days. Somewhere behind them, the bridge was gone. The red-gloved man was gone. But the feeling he left, the pause, the wait, the unasked question, clung to the girl's shoulders like dust. He rode ahead. She followed. That evening, they reached a dry creek bed, rimmed with brush and willow. He stopped there, not for shelter, but because something pulled him to it. A memory, maybe. The air had a stillness that made it feel old. He gathered branches. She gathered stones. They built a fire in the hollow, far from the road, hidden under the arms of a leaning cottonwood. Its trunk had been struck by lightning once, split down the middle, healed into a kind of twisted cross. She touched it once before sitting down. After the fire took, he handed her a strip of jerky. She didn't eat it, just held it, watching the flames turn from orange to blue at the edges. When she slept, she curled against the saddlebag, not the coat. Her breath came uneven. He watched her for a while, then stood and stepped away from the firelight. He took the worn map from his pocket, unfolded it on the ground, smoothing the edges with his hand. Again his finger traced toward Dayton's Crossing. Again that name. But this time, another one echoed in his skull. A woman's name. One he'd buried so deep it had no face anymore. Only a sound, blurred by time and smoke. He hadn't spoken it since the trial. Since the lie. Since the day he was told the child didn't survive. He folded the map, tucked it away, returned to the fire, sat beside her. She stirred slightly and the coat slipped from her shoulder. That's when he saw it, along her collarbone, near the throat. A small birthmark, faint, crescent-shaped. He had seen it before, long ago, in a cabin by the river, on a newborn wrapped in muslin, the one they'd said died in the fire. His hand didn't move, his face didn't change. But the world, the wind, the cold, the silence, shifted around him. Not violently, not with certainty. Just enough to say, you know now. She didn't wake, and he didn't sleep. By morning the thaw had begun. Not a full melt, not yet. Just a change in the air, the kind that softens the edges of frost and loosens the grip of ice on bark and stone. Water trickled beneath the creek bed now, thin and restless, as if stirred from sleep. The wind had shifted too, coming from the south, carrying the scent of wood smoke, damp soil, and something older still. He rose first, packed the bedrolls, buried the fire. She helped in silence, her eyes darker than usual, as if a dream had trailed her into waking. The path ahead twisted between cottonwoods and sloped toward a narrow gorge where the river widened. He hadn't planned to cross it, not yet. But something in him, that cold part where instinct lived, turned the horse toward the bend. The water there was shallow, slow, but the sound of it, always the sound, filled the space between them like a voice too low to understand. She walked beside the horse now, not riding. Her boots left damp prints on the stones. At one point she knelt beside the bank, dipped her fingers in, and stayed like that. Crouched still, listening. Not to the river, but to herself. He watched from the rise. In the light, that mark at her throat caught the sun. Crescent-shaped, unchanged. The same shape he remembered from a different life. Before the trial, before the fire, before the man with the red gloves. He looked away. The river always had a way of showing things too clearly. They crossed it by foot. He led the horse. She followed in the current, dress soaked to the knees, skin blotched red from cold. Halfway through, she stumbled on a rock, caught herself, but when she stood again, she was facing the other bank, the one they'd come from. Not by mistake, just not ready. He offered no hand, just waited. When she crossed, her eyes passed over him, not through. But something had shifted. A distance opened. Not cold, not cruel, just wide. That night they camped under a dry bluff, windless and quiet. He lit no fire. She didn't ask why. They sat with only the sky above, stars dimmed by a low haze, moon veiled like a wound healing under cloth. And somewhere nearby, the river kept moving, slow, relentless, like truth. It never turned back. And neither did he. They came upon it in the afternoon, a house long forgotten, crouched low beneath a hill where the wind rarely reached. The chimney stood, though the roof sagged near the middle, and the boards had turned the color of ashes. A broken fence ringed it loosely, like a rib cage too tired to hold shape. He stopped at the gate, didn't tie the horse, didn't speak, just stood with one hand on the post, eyes fixed on the door that hung crooked from a single hinge. She came up behind him, didn't ask what this place was. Maybe she already knew. They walked the perimeter once, slow, deliberate, as if circling a grave too wide for a single name. Inside the fence, patches of frozen earth showed signs of something once planted. Rows, maybe. Turnips or corn. Hard to tell now. The trapper stepped inside first. The floor creaked beneath his weight, dust blooming up in soft clouds around his boots. There were signs of life, or what had once been. A cracked bowl on the hearth, a wooden chair tipped on its side, an iron bed frame sunk into the wall with rotted rope still looped between its posts. He stared at the hearth, charred at the edges, blackened but not collapsed. On the mantel, a tin cup, unmoved. She wandered through what might have been the kitchen. Her fingers grazed the wall, pausing where a row of notches had been carved. Uneven, child height. She stood there a long time, back turned to him, before stepping outside again. He stayed behind. At the far end of the room, where the light slanted through a shattered pane, stood a trunk. Small cedar, banded in iron. He knelt. The lock had long since rusted. He didn't force it, just touched the lid once, then sat back on his heels. His hand passed over the floor, slow. Found it. A nail bent into the boards. Hammered in with a child's hand, maybe. Or in panic. There was a name scratched near it, or half of one. He stood abruptly, left the house without looking back. She was by the fence watching the trees. They didn't speak, but the silence had changed. It held shape now, like the air before lightning or after a scream in a canyon. Something unspoken had reached them both at once, and it would not let go. As the light began to fade, he pulled the blanket from the saddlebag and handed it to her. She wrapped herself in it without meeting his gaze. He sat across from her, back to the house. A ruined place, a remembered one. That night they did not sleep, not out of fear, out of knowing. The past was no longer behind them. It had found its way forward, and it was waiting. Dawn rose slow and bitter, as if reluctant to touch the house behind them. Frost clung to the grass in thin threads. The horses were restless, ears twitching, hooves shifting in the cold dirt, sensing perhaps the tension that no words had dared to name. The girl sat with her knees drawn close, blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders, face hidden in the folds. He packed in silence, methodical. Each movement carried the weight of memory, though he gave none of it away. Only once did he pause, reaching into the saddlebag for a strip of dried meat, and his hand brushed something flat and folded, tucked into the lining where fingers rarely wandered. The letter, yellowed, unopened. The ink on the outside barely legible, a name he hadn't read in over a decade. Heron, his wife, the girl's mother. He turned his back to the fire, to the girl, to the day itself, and opened it with stiff hands. The paper cracked faintly. It wasn't long. 4 lines written in haste or fear or love that had lost its shape. If you ever find her, don't tell her who you are. Let her choose you for the man you became, not the one I buried. The rest was blank. He folded it again, slower this time, slipped it into his coat. Not the bag. When he turned, she was watching him, not questioning, just waiting. They rode out before the sun cleared the ridge. The house sank behind them, swallowed by trees and time. He didn't look back. Neither did she. By midday, they reached the edge of the lowlands. Open space, wind-scarred plains, distant birds tracing high, silent arcs above them. The land was widening, their path narrowing. They camped in a hollow beneath 2 twisted pines. He didn't sleep. She did, finally deeply, curled beneath his coat now, not the blanket. The fire threw soft shadows across her face, and for a moment he saw the mother in her, the way her brow furrowed slightly in sleep, the shape of her jaw, the tilt of her head against her arm. But the girl was not her mother. She was herself, scarred, silent, a story unfinished. He reached into his coat, touched the letter again. There would be a time to burn it, but not yet. Not until he knew who he truly was in her eyes, and whether that was someone worth staying for. The wind changed again that evening, warmer now, edged with the scent of cattle and gun oil. He smelled it before he saw anything. Old instincts stirred, sharp and low. The kind of unease that settled between shoulder blades and stayed there. They rode single file through a narrow pass where the hills dropped off steep and the rocks underfoot bore the faint trace of wagon wheels long gone. At the top, he dismounted, signaled for her to stay back. From the ridge, he could see it, a single rider, far below, moving slow but steady, tracing their trail. Not close enough to be a threat, not yet. But the horse was tired, and the man wasn't hiding. He watched him for a long time. The way he sat the saddle, the shape of his shoulders, the limp in the left leg, all of it poured into the trapper like smoke through cracks in wood. Old recognition, long buried, now risen. He didn't say the name aloud, didn't have to. Some ghosts don't need to knock. They just wait for the door to open. He returned to her. She looked up from the place where she was boiling water over a low flame. There was something in her face. Tension pulled tight over curiosity, but she didn't ask. He just nodded once. They packed quickly. They didn't speak the rest of the day. That night, they camped without a fire. The stars came down low, crowding close. The moon was bone white, and the hills beyond shimmered like the back of something breathing. He sat with his rifle laid across his knees, cleaned it slowly, purposefully, not out of fear, but preparation. There was no fear left in him, only the hard, flat knowledge that the past was a road with only one end. She watched him from across the cold ash where a fire should have been. Her eyes, dark in the half-light, held no question now. She knew someone was coming, and something else too. The way he moved, slower, more deliberate, like a man putting his affairs in order, even if only in his bones. Sometime near dawn, the coyotes howled far off. A single cry answered closer. The horse stirred. He didn't. She didn't. The day would come soon, and with it, a face he hadn't seen in 17 years, a face that had taken everything, except the one thing he'd only just found. He saw the man first, as the mist lifted, a shape against the pale rise outlined in smoke from a dying campfire. One rider, one rifle. No hurry in him, no hesitation. The girl stood behind a fallen log, hands clasped to her chest. Silent, still. She had not asked who was coming, and he had not told her. Some truths arrive without names. The trapper stepped forward, boots crunching frost, rifle lowered but ready. The years fell away as he walked. All the silence, all the winters, all the miles he'd laid between himself and that moment. Nothing mattered now but what stood ahead and what waited behind him. The man on the ridge said nothing, just watched. Then he dismounted and walked the rest of the way. His face had changed, thinner, sharper, the kind that learned to survive not by kindness, but by calculation. But the eyes, they were the same, cold, clear, the same eyes that had watched a house burn with a woman inside it. No words, not here. The trapper stopped 10 paces out. The other man did the same. They stood like that. Two men hollowed out by the same fire, shaped by the same violence, facing each other with the weight of 1,000 silent days between them. The girl stepped forward once. He didn't turn, just raised a hand, a slow, small gesture. Stay. The wind picked up. The other man shifted, a flicker of something. Maybe regret, maybe recognition, maybe just a twitch before a shot. The trapper raised his rifle, then stopped. There was a letter in his pocket, a girl behind him, and a choice no bullet could make for him. He lowered the gun, turned away, and walked. The man didn't follow, didn't speak, didn't move. Behind the trapper, the girl's breath caught in her throat. He kept walking, past her, past the fire ring, past the line where the trees began. She followed, not close, not far, as if afraid to break what had just passed between them. They didn't look back, not when the ridge vanished behind them, not when the wind carried the sound of hooves away into silence. That night they lit a fire again, small, steady. He handed her the letter. She didn't open it, just sat beside him, her shoulder barely brushing his, eyes on the flame. And in that quiet, in that final breath of winter, something shifted. Not an ending, but the place where endings break open and let something else begin.